I think we're live. Right. Hello and welcome to this, our first autumn event of the SoA Home Festival. I'm Martin Reed. I work here in the communications team at the SoA. We have a fantastic series of events coming up between now and December, which will, we hope, entertain and engage wherever you are and regardless of what flavour of lockdown or not you are currently enjoying. Most of our events are free. They include discussions on imposter syndrome, making money as an author, working on comics, workshops on pitching, research skills and podcasting. We're running sessions focused on well-being, including, yes, online yoga, and a series of in-conversation events with some of our favourite people. Starting with Neil Gaiman today, we have Ian Rankin, Daljit Nagra, Deborah McGack, and on 26th of November, in partnership with the Writers' Union of Canada, we're having an intimate little chat with Margaret Atwood, which we're very excited about. These events and more will show up on our events pages. That's societyofauthors.org/events in the weeks ahead. One last thing from me. Thank you so much for the donations you've made to the Authors Contingency Fund. Your contributions really are making it possible for us to support authors facing financial hardship in the health crisis. It really does help. For this event alone, between you, you've raised over £2,000. So thank you so much. Now I'm going to disappear and hand you over to Alison and Neil. So please give a warm virtual welcome to Alison Flood and Neil Gaiman.
Thank you, Martin. Shall I wait for you to disappear?
I'm finding out to disappear. I'm going now. Bye-bye.
Okay, excellent. Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. I'm Alison, the Guardian's books reporter. If you want to post a question for Neil, you can post it in the chat and we'll get to as many as we can in the last 15 minutes. This session will run for 45 minutes until 3:15 when I have to pick people up from school. I thought I'd say a few words about Neil before we start, although it's hard to sum up everything he's done in a short intro. There are the novels, American Gods, Stardust, The Ocean at the End of the Lane, Good Omens, which he co-wrote with Terry Pratchett. There are the graphic novels, topped of course by Sandman, the children's books, Coraline, which my children insist is still too scary to be read in our house, the Graveyard Book, for which he became the first author to win both the Newbery and Carnegie medals, picture books, most recently Pirate Stew, which is out today and which is deemed delightful by my kids, and all sorts of adaptations. There it is, gorgeous pictures. He wrote the screenplay for Good Omens and shepherded his and Terry's work as a showrunner into something wonderful. American Gods has been adapted. The Sandman is in the process of being adapted, for which you're co-writing and executive producing. Is that right, Neil?
Yeah.
Excellent. And The Ocean at the End of the Lane was showing at the National Theatre until coronavirus put an end to that, which is particularly galling for me as I was meant to go for my birthday. Anyway, that's probably not everything. But if we could start, Neil, by talking a bit about you and your creative routine, that would be great. Can you tell us a bit about what a typical day for you is like at the moment?
Well, there's such an enormous gulf between my dream routine and my days these days in COVID, because my dream routine is I get up in the morning, maybe go for a jog, deal with important emails. This is all probably after I've taken Ash to school, and then I go off to a coffee shop or similar with a pen and a notebook, and then return home around 4:30 or 5, pick Ash up from school and cope with emails and do meetings and things for the rest of the day. That is my perfect, happy writing day. And I don't have those anymore. I am incredibly fortunate in that I'm in my house on the Isle of Skye, which is my home in the UK. I'm here, I get to work, but I have people now scattered all over the world, Zoom calls all over the world always. So I'll wake up now to Ash going to bed in New Zealand, and I'll read to him or talk to him before he goes to sleep, and then deal with emails, maybe go for a bike ride. If I'm really lucky, I'll just sort of take the bike out and get some air into my lungs. And then it's a mad day of trying to write while being interrupted by Zoom calls. And they can be, and they're all necessary. There's all sorts of stuff happening all over the world. But it does seem to be how people have started communicating and dealing with things. And even what would have been 5-minute phone calls somehow managed to be exactly 1 hour long Zoom calls, in which you have to sort of maneuver and press and things, and you can get to the end of a very long day and notice that no significant writing has happened, but lots of talking has, which is incredibly frustrating for me. On the other hand, Sandman is a couple of weeks away from starting shooting now. So there will be 3 or 4 phone calls a day from Alan Heinberg, the wonderful showrunner, on casting, on props, on design, on all of that kind of things, on tiny script things. There are moments that we're having to shoot in episode 1 that won't be used until the final season, for example. And today I had to sign off on some costume stuff for that and some script stuff for that.
So you're super involved with all the details then, like with Good Omens, or not to that extent?
Much. Well, Good Omens I did. Good Omens I made. That was me. So I wrote it, and I then was on set every day and signing off on everything. And I'm not doing that. Alan is doing that, but I'm a lot more involved than I was with, let's say, American Gods, which is its own entity. It carries on. I get to suggest things, I get to listen, I get to talk to them, I get to tell them what I liked and didn't like, but I don't actually get to make it. Whereas with Sandman, I'm one of the people making it.
Okay, so in between all of that, what are you actually trying to write at the moment?
I'm actually trying to write 3 different things.
Okay.
I'm trying to write some script stuff that I cannot talk about, and a new Neverwhere novel.
Excellent.
And a novel for kids. So that is the stuff that I'm currently writing. It's all in different notebooks of different colors. The most impressive one is the one I'm writing my Neverwhere novel in, which is about 20 years ago, almost 20 years ago, in Venice, I bought 4 beautiful leather-bound notebooks of blank pages. And the first one I wrote the Graveyard book in. And this is the second one.
Excellent. Gosh, what awaits for the 3rd and 4th then?
So it'll be fun.
Yeah. Wow, I've got Neverwhere here. I've got my pile of Neil Gaiman books. Here's my Neverwhere. But that's something you've been thinking about doing for a while, right?
I have. I started the novel about 4.5 years ago. And then as we got to the point almost exactly 3 years ago of shooting Good Omens, I had to go, I can't keep my novel writing head going and do this book. So I stopped for a while, and more recently just sort of went, okay, it's time to get back to my novel. It's waiting for me. It misses me.
I can see lots of people very excited in the chat about that. Is there anything more you can tell us about what you're doing with it?
It's called The Seven Sisters. It's it's set now, which is really kind of fun. But
now 2020
now 2020. Oof. But for Richard Mayhew, it's set 6 months after the events of Neverwhere, which occurred in the late 90s. Because time in London below does not move like time does in London above. So he is very baffled as to where things like the Shard have come from, because they weren't there the last time he looked.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds really fun. Can I ask if you can give us a bit of a glimpse around your office, your study, where this is all the magic is taking place?
Absolutely. Yeah, I can pick up my camera and turn it around. What are we looking at? There, over there is my little wood burning stove, which is working very hard because it's cold here on Skye. Out there is the view out my window and a stepping machine that is almost never used because you can go for walks and bicycle rides instead. Down there is a table, and on that table is the blue notebook that I'm writing a script in currently.
The secret script.
We can't make it out there. You can't. I think that this is just a little bit too out of focus for you to see what it is, which is probably a good thing. And underneath there is the brown notebook that I was talking about. Behind me, there's a wonderful staircase here.
Wow, lovely.
That goes up into the writing area, and then there's books behind me on these shelves, and then there's me.
Excellent. And are the books all carefully arranged for Zoom calls?
Ish. There is an ish in that so that the idea behind the books here on Skye is they are 50% my books. Whenever I'm here, I suddenly decide that I need all of the Catherine Briggs fairy encyclopedias or something for some reason, and I get them all in. So they're either my books or they are books that people who use my house for a week, which is something I tend to do to friends when I'm not here. I say, go and use the house. It's Skye. It's beautiful. And they say, well, okay. And I say, but you have to leave me some books behind. That's the only rule. And they say, what kind of books? And I say, anything. So some people leave behind beautiful books. Some people leave behind books that are very much what they are or who they are. Some people just leave behind what they've been reading. But we still haven't filled all of the shelves here, which is good because I want lots more shelves for lots of people to leave books and lots more shelves for me to have books. But I have gone around the room and put lots of books behind me for Zoom. So there are much emptier shelves. There are some emptier shelves over there.
That's very
over
honest.
there. There's some completely empty shelves, but the ones behind me have books on. In no particular order.
Yeah, it sounds like your days are upturned at the moment. Have you found it harder to kind of be creative at all in these weird pandemic times?
Definitely, yeah. I think the biggest problem that I find is it's like the part of my head that plots, that goes and is just examining futures for characters and is going, okay, if we follow this path, we get to here. If we follow this path, we get to here. If we follow this path, that's more interesting. Okay, so we're going to go down to there, and then we're going to go along here. What happens then? And it's sort of just a weird little chugging engine. And that chugging engine is not working because the part of my head that is worrying about the future is just worrying about the future. It's what happens politically, what happens if we go into another lockdown, how does this work, how does that work? Any news yet from New Zealand about getting back to New Zealand? Any news about this? What is Amanda doing here? And it's just a kind of giant process of worrying about stuff. And sometimes, you know, the idea that I've been here for as long as I have and have written as little fiction as I have is shocking. On the other hand, I've surprised myself. I wrote, for example, a short story for a Doctor Who charity anthology, quite possibly because it was a charity anthology. I was not getting paid for it. Nothing depended on it. And they'd asked me for a story with my character, the Corsair from Doctor Who, in it. And I just thought that sounds like fun. And 3 days later, I had a short story and it was lovely. And it's like, okay, I can still do this. I have to remind myself I can still do this.
Yeah, we all have to be a bit gentle with ourselves at the moment anyway. And just getting through the days can be hard if you're clicking on live blogs all of the time and and worrying about the news.
Absolutely. And I think that for me is the most important thing. I mean, it's like, just be kind to yourself and celebrate any victories, no matter how tiny, rather than beating yourself up for anything that you haven't done.
Yeah.
And I look back, and I can look back at a week and go, I've done an enormous amount. And I can look back at the same week and go, I've done nothing. And both things are true.
Mm-hmm. Do you find it harder to write about human interactions at the moment, given that we're not really having very many?
Yeah. Or at least what I'm missing is those accidental interactions that send your head off into an interesting place. The randomness and weirdness of just being in a world in which anything is going to happen, and you can see somebody walk down a street and pass a ladder, and suddenly you go, oh, that's a short story. Okay. And your mind is off working. And there's just a lot less of that for me, because I do the same day over and over again with tiny, tiny variations. And, a couple of weeks ago, I had to go out and get a document notarized, well, just signed by a solicitor. And so I went off and did that, and suddenly thought, this is actually the first time I've been into the big city, being the not incredibly big town of Portree, since I've been here, and realizing that, look, there's other people around. I'd forgotten about them. And
did it feel a bit weird and frightening?
It definitely felt weird. I'm not sure about frightening, but just odd and off. I've been here since the end of April, with a week that I needed to go down to London in the middle, and wait till it was okay to travel and go down and have a few meetings down there and do stuff. And that week let me come back with stuff to write about. It let me come back with ideas.
Yeah. Have you had to change anything that you've been writing in order to kind of reflect the reality of 2020? I guess you're setting the Neverwhere sequel in 2020, so it has to reflect the pandemic anyway.
Mostly that's fine, because I'm in London below, this strange semi-fictional, temporally dysfunctional version of London. So it only gets to reflect when we briefly pop up to the surface. Not really, but it's starting to impinge in interesting ways. I'm working on a couple of television projects, and we're now having to start to think about, okay, are we doing these? Are we setting them in the past? Are we setting them in an alternate present, which is just like the one we're in, only more normal? Or are we trying to guess what it's going to be like 2 years from now, when this stuff is actually released, so that we're not accidentally releasing something from an alternate past or something, or an alternate present? So there's a certain amount of trying to figure that out right now.
Yeah. Have you got any tips for other writers on keeping going at the moment?
Only not to beat yourself up. I think that honestly is the biggest one. Celebrate every word, every 10 words, every 100 words, every 50 words, every 1,000 words, every 2,000 words. That is wonderful. And if you don't get the words down, that's okay. Maybe you did something enormous that day, like succeed in taking a shower and clean your teeth twice. And that's kind of okay too, in this weird world we're in.
Yeah. Are you reading anything in particular at the moment that has comforted you or calmed you?
When I was back in sort of May, June, when I was in incredibly dark places, I loved Featherhood by Charlie Gilmore. His sort of it's both an autobiography and a memoir and an account of his father and of raising a magpie and stuff like that. So that I thought was wonderful. And I was reading a whole bunch of children's fiction, revisiting some and visiting some for the first time. I'd become obsessed by a remarkable Scottish author called Nicholas Stewart Gray, who I'd loved as a small boy. And Gray's work had been in the library, but you never really saw it in bookshops. And so being up here, I wound up ordering collections of Nicholas Stewart Gray short stories and some of the books that I'd never read, never even heard of. And some of them were great and some of them weren't. But the great ones made up for the ones that weren't.
Yeah, excellent.
Right now, I'm reading Mary Beard's book, The Invention of Jane Harrison, which is a lovely biography of somebody who fascinates me, and that I'm also is an examination of how biographies work while at the same time being a biography. And I've just been reading a bunch of books about Marty Feldman.
Right. Beautifully eclectic. You're
you're all over the place. There are no rules.
I'm rereading Dune because I can't wait to see the adaptation, and I wanted to remind myself quite why I love the sandworm so much.
I love the idea that a Dune is going to come out that is going to feel like Dune. I was a young journalist, probably 24, I think, when the Dune movie came out. And I remember going to Frank Herbert's press conferences and interviewing Frank Herbert afterwards, and then being at the screening and talking to David Lynch afterwards. And there was this sort of weirdness of everybody going, well, it's a very interesting film that doesn't actually feel very much like anything that anybody felt reading Dune. There's a sort of
it's its own thing.
It is very much its own thing. It's not a bad thing. It's a wonderful David Lynch film, but it felt like he'd been given completely the wrong film to make. I wish that somebody had given him, Alfred Bester's The Star's My Destination or The Demolished Man or something, and seen what he did with that.
Yeah.
But it was so not Dune, and I was so excited, and watching Frank Herbert not saying bad things about it was really strangely painful, in that he was there to promote it, and he was talking about how, well, this is, you can hear my dialogue all the way through, but could not actually bring himself to talk about loving this film because it was obvious that he didn't, and that was strange.
Yeah.
And I think just from the little clips of the new film, I'm going, oh, he would have loved this.
Yeah. Oh, well, I can't wait to see it. Now, Neil, millions of great questions are coming in from the people who are watching. So I think, would you do us a little reading, and then we'll get on to questions. So Neil is going to read a little bit to us from The Ocean at the End of the Lane for a few minutes, and then we will get on to all of your questions.
And this was Alison's request because she doesn't get to go and see the National Theatre version this year because
very sad.
COVID. It is very, very sad. So
you said it was very good as well.
It's brilliant. I was thrilled and I cried. I cried when I was at the read-through, and then at the first night I was at, I got to sit between crying people, and one of them was my wife, so that's kind of expected. But one of them was a journalist whose tears were sploshing on his notebook while he was writing, and that was much more impressive, actually.
Yeah.
It was the first day of the spring holidays. 3 weeks of no school. I woke early, thrilled by the prospect of endless days to fill however I wished. I would read. I would explore. I pulled on my shorts, my t-shirt, my sandals. I went downstairs to the kitchen. My father was cooking while my mother slept in. He was wearing his dressing gown over his pajamas. He always cooked breakfast on Saturdays. I said, Dad, where's my comic? He normally bought me a copy of Smash before he drove home from work on Fridays, and I would read it on Saturday mornings. In the back of the car. Do you want toast? Yes, I said, but not burnt. My father did not like toasters. He toasted bread under the grill, and usually he burnt it. I went outside into the drive. I looked around. I went back into the house, pushed the kitchen door, went in. Dad, where's the car? In the drive. No, it isn't. What? The telephone rang, and my father went out into the hall where the phone was to answer it. I heard him talking to someone. The toast began to smoke under the grill. I got up on the chair and turned the grill off. That was the police, my father said. Someone's reported seeing our car abandoned at the bottom of the lane. I said I hadn't even reported it stolen yet. Right, we can head down now, meet them there. Toast! He pulled the pan out from beneath the grill. The toast was smoking and blackened on one side. Is my comic there, or did they steal it? I don't know. The police didn't mention your comic. My father put peanut butter on the burnt side of each piece of toast, replaced his dressing gown with a coat worn over his pajamas, put on a pair of shoes, and we walked down the lane together. He munched his toast as we walked. I held my toast and did not eat it. We had walked for perhaps 5 minutes down the narrow lane which ran through fields on each side when a police car came up behind us. It slowed, and the driver greeted my father by name. I hid my piece of burnt toast behind my back while my father talked to the policeman. I wished my family would buy normal sliced white bread, the kind that went into toasters like every other family I knew. My father had found a local baker's shop where they made thick loaves of heavy brown bread, and he insisted on buying them. He said they tasted better, which was, to my mind, nonsense. Proper bread was white and pre-sliced and tasted like almost nothing. That was the point. The driver of the police car got out to open the passenger door, told me to get in. My father rode up front beside the driver. The police car went slowly down the lane. The whole lane was unpaved back then, just wide enough for one car at a time, a puddly, precipitous, bumpy way with flints sticking up from it, the whole thing rutted by farm equipment and rain and time. These kids, said the policeman, they think it's funny. Steal a car, drive it around, abandon it. They'll be locals. I'm just glad it was found so fast, said my father. Funny them leaving it down here, though, said the policeman, because it's a long walk back to anywhere from here. We passed a bend in the lane and saw the white Mini over on the side, in front of a gate leading into a field, tires sunk deep in the brown mud. We drove past it, parked on the grass verge. The policeman let me out, and the three of us walked over to the Mini, while the policeman told my dad about crime in this area, and while it was obviously the local kids who'd done it, then my dad was opening the passenger side door with his spare key. He said, someone's left something on the back seat. He reached back and pulled away the blue blanket that covered the thing in the back seat, even as the policeman was telling him that he shouldn't do that, and I was staring at the back seat because that was where my comic was. So I saw it. It was an it, the thing I was looking at, not a him. Although I was an imaginative child prone to nightmares, I had persuaded my parents to take me to Madame Tussauds Waxworks in London when I was 6, because I'd wanted to visit the Chamber of Horrors I'd read about in my comics. I'd wanted to thrill to waxworks of Dracula and Frankenstein's monster and the Wolfman. Instead, I was walked through a seemingly endless sequence of dioramas of unremarkable, glum-looking men and women who had murdered people, usually lodgers and members of their own families, and who were then murdered in their turn by hanging, by the electric chair, in gas chambers. Most of them were depicted with their victims in awkward social situations, seated around a dinner table perhaps, as their poisoned family members expired. The plaques that explained who they were also told me that the majority of them had murdered their families and sold the bodies to anatomy. It was then that the word anatomy garnered its own edge of horror for me. I did not know what anatomy was. I knew only that anatomy made people kill their children. The only thing that had kept me running, screaming from the Chamber of Horrors as I was led around it was that none of the waxworks had looked fully convincing. They could not look truly dead because they did not ever look alive. The thing in the back seat that had been covered by the blue blanket was not convincing either. It looked a little like the opal miner, but it was dressed in a black suit with a white ruffled shirt and a black bow tie. Its hair was slicked back and artificially shiny. Its eyes were staring. Its lips were bluish, but its skin was very red. It looked like a parody of health. There was no gold chain around its neck. I could see underneath it, crumpled and bent, my copy of Smash, with Batman looking just as he did on the television, on the cover. I don't remember who said what then, just that they made me stand away from the Mini. I crossed the road and stood there on my own while the policeman talked to my father and wrote things down in a notebook. I stared at the Mini. A length of green garden hose ran from the exhaust pipe up to the driver's window. There was thick brown mud all over the exhaust, holding the hose pipe in place. Nobody was watching me. I took a bite of my toast.
Oof. Thank you, Neil. Blimey, thank you so much. That was very creepy. Hopefully there should be, or we will put for all of you, a Blackwell's link in the chat to purchase books by authors who are featuring in the Society of Authors Home Festival, including The Ocean at the End of the Lane. And the link is also linked up to the Society's affiliate, so they'll get 6% towards their authors contingency fund when people use it. Thank you,
in
Neil.
which case, let me remind you, there's also
Pirate
Stew, published today. It's nothing like that thing I just read. This is funny. There we go. Pictures by Chris Riddell inside. Lots of pictures.
Pirate pictures. I'm going to start with a question from Nicola at the Society of Authors, who asks Neil, what does the Society of Authors mean to you? Why do you think it's an important thing?
I joined the Society of Authors as a 23-year-old. I don't remember if I was 22 or 23, but I just got my first contracts for my first books, and I did not have an agent or anything. I was a baby. And I joined the Society of Authors and had them look at the contracts for me and improve them. In later years, as a grown-up author, I've had them, I've hit points with English publishers, with UK publishers, where all of a sudden they were doing something very wrong, and I and my agent couldn't fix things, and I'd gone to the Society of Authors, and a letter from the Society of Authors to the publisher has suddenly made everything okay. And that's ways that I've used it. I've seen the Society of Authors helping authors for the, whatever it is, however long I've been a member now, 36, 37 years. And I'm just incredibly proud to be part of it. So that's what the Society of Authors means to me.
Great stuff. I've got a question from someone who's asking, for aspiring writers at the beginning of their career, do you think that it's useful to practice their craft by writing reinterpretations or retellings of stories in the way that you did with The Sleeper and the Spindle or Snow, Glass, Apples? Or do you think you should have original ideas from the outset? Or does it not really matter, just write?
I'd say just write is the big important thing. Whatever it is and whoever you are, the important thing is that you're writing. And I'd also say that very often young writers have a weird kind of double-edged sword problem of, you need to write in order to get good, but you don't know what to write about. You need to plot in order to get good, but you don't really have any plot ideas. You need to write characters in order to get good at writing characters, but you don't know how to write characters. And when I've got a book coming out later this month called The Neil Gaiman Reader, which is about 50 stories of mine and some extracts from novels, all placed in chronological order. And one thing that's very, very obvious is that for my first 3 or 4 years, I don't sound like me. I'm fairly good at writing stories that sound like other people and that really are other people, and are me doing acts of literary ventriloquism. And it takes me a while to find out who I am, and it takes me a while to find out what I sound like. But I'm learning on the way, and it doesn't matter that I've just written a John Collier short story, or that this thing is an H.P. Lovecraft parody, or this is me doing the Gothics or whatever, because I'm learning. And that's the important thing. And I would say the important thing for any young writer is to learn, get the words out, get all the clunky sentences out, get all of the bad plotting out, get all of the lousy characters out. They need to be out of, they're sitting there in your fingers, waiting to come out the end of your pen or onto your keyboard, and you have to get them out before you can get the good stuff.
Excellent. Someone else has asked, have you ever lacked motivation, and what did you do when it happened?
I'm, I guess, lucky in that I've never really had a real job, or at least, to put it another way, I've earned my living by writing since I was 22. So motivation was always there. It was being able to pay the rent, and then it was being able to pay the mortgage. It was putting food on the table. It was buying clothes for the kids. That was always incredibly good motivation. What I tend to lack now sometimes is just, there's a thing where there are lots of demands on my attention, and what I don't get to do is go, I'm not going to pay any attention to all of the stuff over here, and I'm just going to work on this thing over there, which is what I would like to do. And I also get into a weird place sometimes where if there are too many things that I need to do at once, I stop and don't do any of them. And just get, it's not even that I get overwhelmed, it's just that anything that I do means I feel guilty about not doing any of the others. Whereas if I don't do anything and just go and make myself another cup of tea or go for a walk or whatever, I'm not doing one of them, so it's okay. And that can persist until the point where somebody phones me in a panic and points out that something is due in on Friday. And then I tend to suddenly kick back into gear and go, okay, well, this is more important than that stuff.
Yeah. Okay. You're still a journalist at heart. You need specific deadlines.
They're very good.
Yeah, definitely. It's a lovely question from Malcolm Fraser, who says that he was on Skye a few weeks ago where he got a whole idea for his next book and started writing it. He doesn't know how it will end. Do you ever not know how your books will end?
I often don't know how my books will end. I don't necessarily have to have an ending for a book before I start. I have to have something. You can't start a book without knowing something. And I often like to have things that I think might be the ends. And then 3/4 of the way through the book, I'll normally stop and I'll write an outline. Because that's the point where I actually take stock of all of the dangling plot threads and all of the things that are going on, and I need to figure out what is going to happen by the end and where I'm going and how I'm wrapping them up. And very often the end that I get to isn't the end that I thought I was heading towards when I began. But it's always good to have some kind of end in your head. Even if it's just knowing where you want your characters to be emotionally. You don't necessarily need to know what's going to happen, but you need to know who you want them to be then, and what you want them to have learned.
Yeah. Here's 2 questions that I think you can maybe do together. So Fiona has asked, what writing mode do you prefer? Fiction, prose, TV, screenplay? And Elizabeth has asked if you ever plan to write another original comic series like Sandman, or if you'll stick to prose and screenplays.
I think what I like best is the freedom. I think that if somebody said to me, you can only write one kind of thing from now on, I would feel grumpy and constrained, and would probably immediately break it. If they said, okay, you can only write short stories, I'd promptly write a novel. If they said you can only write comics, I'd write prose. So I think the best thing for me is, that lovely kid in a candy shop feeling of just being able to go from shelf to shelf and open up a jar of something that looks interesting and stick my arm in and find out what's inside the jar.
Yeah.
Would I go back and do something like Sandman? Sandman at this point, I think, is well over 3,000 pages long.
Yeah. I've got this. Oh.
Exactly, and there are three books like that now, and it's 3,000 pages, and it probably took me about 4 pages of writing to describe each page for the artist. So that's 12,000 pages of actual script has been written now over the years. I might well go back and do something else one day. I loved getting to go back and do Sandman Overture a few years ago and do this wonderful 6-part sort of weird space opera thing that was nothing like any of the other Sandman, but also was absolutely shone lights onto bits of plot that I'd known but had never got around to telling people. I can't ever imagine that I would do another thing like Sandman of that size, because there's so much other stuff to do. But I can absolutely see myself going back and telling another Sandman story, or telling another story with some of the characters from Sandman. There are things that I plotted that I've never got around to telling. There are stories I know that I've never told. So it's absolutely not impossible that more might happen there.
Yeah, and you did say that there might be an American Gods too as well. I seem to remember.
There's definitely the trouble is that I tend to be somebody who comes up with, who knows what the next book is of something, and then it's just a matter of going, okay, well, I've got the choice of writing that, or of doing this completely new thing, or doing this shiny thing over here. The one that is frustrating, because everybody wants a sequel to it, and I just don't have a sequel to it, is Coraline. People are always like, when are you doing Coraline 2? And I say, whenever I come up with a story that is better than Coraline 1, I will do a new Coraline. And I haven't yet, and have resigned myself to not. And they say, well, why don't you do one about, the other mother before Coraline? Or why didn't you do one about Coraline all grown up and her daughter going to the house? And it's kind of like, oh, because none of them sound better than Coraline as a story. And I want it to be
Coraline can
something
stand
more.
alone. What about Good Omens, though? You said, did you and Terry come up with a sort of vague?
We did. We plotted an entire sequel. So the plot to that does exist, and we'll wait and see if it ever gets told. It will be lovely to be able to tell it one day.
It sure would. Okay, we're running low on time. I'm going to ask you one more question from Fiona, who asks if your characters take on their own life and write their own story, or do you crack the whip? Which is a nice question.
It's a lovely question. I'm always the one writing. Occasionally, I have grown so fond of a character that I've decided not to do the terrible thing to that character that the plot was demanded. It's that thing that it's the reason I could not be George R.R. Martin, because he creates characters that you fall in love with and then he kills them without qualms. And I qualm all over the place, and then I start working out ways to save them. And then I'm proud of myself having saved them, and nobody knows that I saved them, but I saved them. And sometimes I'll get to a place and go, this character would not do this thing. I had a thing plotted, but the truth is that actually the character that I've created would not in this situation do that, which means I have to stop and rethink. Or occasionally just going, oh my God, he's going to do this thing. What does that mean? An example would be with the Nancy Boys. There's a moment in there where I had a character in the lift going up to see a crooked manager and agent to find out what was happening, to basically confront him with being crooked. And as I was writing this scene, I thought, hang on, if she goes and confronts him, he will kill her. And then I was like, well, that wasn't in my plot. And I'm meant to be writing a comedy here. And I don't know if people can people kill each other in comedies? Can they kill each other in this book? How does that work? And I stopped writing that book for definitely 8 weeks. I think maybe about 12 weeks, while all I did was think about it and chew over what that meant. I got to the point where he'd murdered her and then put down the notebook and thought about what comedy was and thought about what a novel was and thought about what this novel was and how it would end and what it meant for the tone of the last third of the book and where it would go, and wound up writing a book that was for the last third, much darker than the book that I'd anticipated, which I thought was a bit of a romp and a frolic. Mm-hmm. And it got less frolicky and much darker because this thing had happened. But it also felt like much truer to itself than the frolicky version would have been.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, Neil, I can see loads of people are saying thank you for cheering them up and reminding them why they like writing. And I can see someone saying, yay, a new Good Omens. So you've promised us that as well. But can I just say thanks so much for coming on and chatting. You've definitely cheered up my afternoon, and obviously that of a lot of other people. So good luck with the writing on Skye. I hope you don't get interrupted by too many Zoom calls this afternoon.
Thank you. And just to reiterate, the Society of Authors is glorious. Their magazine, The Author, is filled with wisdom and stuff you actually need to know if you're a writer. Plus, the small ads in the back are filled with things that are actually great for writers. They have their contract service, which is invaluable. And there, little Society of Authors plug.
Excellent. Thank you, Neil. And do get your books from the Blackwell's link, everybody. Thanks a lot. I am going to press the red button now.
What's going to happen?
I don't know. Let's see.